They shoved my pregnant wife to the ground, over flowers. But they had no idea her husband was a battle-hardened soldier, and what I did next changed the entire neighborhood forever. What would you have done? This isn't just a story about it's about justice. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a new chapter, the kind every hard-working American dreams of. Marcus Taylor, a decorated Army veteran with 3 grueling tours under his belt, and his radiant wife Emily, 8 months pregnant and glowing with the hope of motherhood, had finally scraped together enough savings to buy their first home, a charming 2-story brick house nestled in a manicured North Carolina neighborhood, where flags waved proudly on every porch, and the air smelled of cut grass and backyard BBQs. It looked like the American dream on the outside, but beneath the surface, something dark was waiting. From the moment they moved in, things just felt off. Their mailbox, a perfectly normal off-white color, was suddenly a problem. A folded note appeared one morning. Mailbox must be repainted to HOA standard white, violation notice number 001. Then came another. Trash bin visible past collection hours, $50 fine. And another still. Improper curtain color. Please remove or replace. At first, Marcus brushed it off. He'd lived through war zones. He wasn't going to be rattled by bureaucratic nonsense. But Emily was different. She was nearing the end of her pregnancy, her nerves already worn thin, and each passive-aggressive notice felt like an intrusion, a silent judgment. It wasn't just the paper slips either. Sometimes she'd catch a dark SUV cruising slowly past their house. Someone in the passenger seat taking pictures. Lights would flicker at night. The cameras they installed would show brief shadows at the edge of the lawn. It was subtle, but suffocating. Then came the Saturday that changed everything. Marcus had gone 2 houses down to help an elderly neighbor, repair his backyard fence, a simple, kind gesture. Emily stepped outside to water her flower bed, her belly heavy, her steps slow but steady. That's when the black SUV rolled up again, tires crunching softly on the pavement. 3 men stepped out, dressed in HOA polos like they were on some sort of official mission. No smiles, no greetings, just clipboards and cold eyes. They started, snapping pictures of her lawn, her porch, her front door. Emily, calm but confused, approached them and asked what they were doing. The tallest one, Carl, she would later learn, looked at her with the kind of condescension that makes your blood boil. "You've been warned. This lawn is overgrown, and the edging is non-compliant," he said flatly. Emily blinked in disbelief. "It's freshly cut." "What are you talking about?" she replied. "Step back inside, ma'am. This is official HOA business," Carl snapped, stepping forward into her personal space. Emily's heart pounded. "Please leave the property," she said, her voice firm despite the tightness in her chest. Carl ignored her and walked toward the side of the house. Emily moved to block his path, standing her ground. That's when it happened. Carl shoved her. Hard, she stumbled back, falling into the grass, hands instinctively wrapping around her belly. The baby kicked in protest. The other 2 men froze, eyes wide, but said nothing. Carl just scoffed. "You people think the rules don't apply to you." Then, without another word, they got in the SUV and drove off, leaving Emily in tears, on the ground. She called Marcus, her voice trembling. "They pushed me," she whispered. "They pushed me." Time stopped. Marcus ran. He didn't even hang up the phone. When he reached her, she was sitting on the porch, shaking, her knees scraped, her eyes red. He helped her up, checked her belly, then rushed her to urgent care. Thankfully, both Emily and the baby were okay. But the emotional wound? That would take longer to heal. Furious, Marcus contacted the HOA. He expected immediate action, or at the very least concern. Instead, he got brushed off. "We'll review the situation," they said in an automated email. No call, no apology, just silence. That was when something in Marcus shifted. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. This was about principle, about dignity, about what's right. And he wasn't going to let it go. Not now. Not ever. He dug In heart, he compiled every letter, every citation, every bit of camera footage. He interviewed neighbors, quietly at first, who confessed they'd also been harassed, bullied, fined unfairly, even threatened with foreclosure over minor violations. One woman broke into tears telling Marcus how her late husband's garden gnome collection was deemed unsightly, and she was fined into bankruptcy. It was a pattern, a culture of intimidation. Marcus found a lawyer, sharp, experienced, not afraid of HOA politics. They uncovered something explosive. Carl had prior assault accusations in a neighboring community. The HOA president, Carl's golf buddy, the enforcers, not even properly licensed for security or inspection duties. Marcus took it further. He contacted the local news station. The story hit like a grenade. Pregnant woman pushed by HOA enforcer. Veteran husband fights back. The community exploded in outrage. Comments poured in. Neighbors came forward. A petition to dissolve the entire HOA gained over 500 signatures in 2 days. Marcus held a town meeting, and the turnout was so overwhelming that residents had to stand outside in the parking lot. In that moment, the truth was undeniable. The HOA wasn't protecting the neighborhood. They were controlling it. Viewers, if you believe in standing up when no one else will, if you believe in fighting for justice even when the odds are stacked, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications to all so you never miss a story that cuts through the noise. Because people like Marcus, they remind us what real strength looks like. 6 weeks later, the entire HOA board was removed. Carl was arrested for assault and unlawful impersonation of an enforcement officer. The HOA's accounts were audited, revealing thousands of dollars in unaccounted funds. Emily gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom they named Justice, a name chosen with love, pain, and defiance. And Marcus? He became a local hero, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. But just when things seemed to settle, a letter arrived. No return address. Just a single typed line inside. You should have left it alone. The cameras picked up a shadow on their front porch that night, and then the feed cut out. Something tells me this story isn't over. Stay tuned. It was a warm, quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the sun feels just right on your skin and the world seems to be taking a deep breath. Birds chirped in the trees lining the North Carolina cul-de-sac, kids rode bikes down sidewalks, and American flags fluttered in the breeze. Marcus Taylor, a former Army sergeant with 3 tours under his belt and more grit than most men twice his size, was doing what he loved best, helping a neighbor in need. Mr. Dawson, a widower in his 70s, had a rotting fence that needed fixing, and Marcus, true to form, offered to lend a hand without hesitation. Back at home, his wife Emily, 8 months pregnant, glowing but moving slowly, stepped outside to water her daisies. They were her peace, her escape. She loved how they reached for the sun, just like the baby in her belly reached for life. But peace was a luxury their neighborhood's HOA didn't seem to believe in. As Emily gently sprayed the soil, a low rumble approached from down the street. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled up and stopped abruptly in front of their house. She paused, blinking against the sunlight. Then the doors flew open. 3 men stepped out in sync, all wearing dark sunglasses and matching navy blue polo shirts stitched with the HOA's insignia like they were on some kind of enforcement mission. Clipboards in hand, they moved quickly, muttering under their breath as they snapped photos of the lawn, the porch, even the windows. There was no hello, no explanation, just cold stares and clipped movements. Emily, confused but trying to stay composed, called out, "Excuse me, can I help you?" The tallest of them, a broad-shouldered man with a crew cut and a jaw clenched tighter than a locked safe, looked at her like she was beneath him. His name tag read, Carl. He stepped forward and said, "Violation of community landscaping guidelines. You've been warned." Emily blinked. I'm just watering flowers." "What violation?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to betray the rising anxiety in her chest. Carl didn't even blink. "Don't talk back," he said, stepping in closer, too close, his shadow falling over her like a storm cloud. "This is your final notice." Emily took a deep breath and stood her ground. She wasn't a confrontational person, but she wasn't about to be intimidated either. "If there's a problem, you can speak to my husband. He'll be back in just a few minutes. Please leave the property." Carl narrowed his eyes. Then, one of the other men abruptly walked around her and toward the side of the house. "Hey!" Emily shouted, stepping forward to block his path. "You can't just go around back." That's when everything changed. In a split second, Carl lunged forward and shoved her, hard. Her feet slipped on the damp grass, and she fell backwards, landing with a thud that knocked the air from her lungs. She gasped, one hand clutching her belly as the baby kicked violently in reaction. The other two men froze mid-step, stunned into silence. But Carl? Carl just looked down at her, smirked, and said coldly, "You people think you're above the rules." Then they turned and got back into the SUV like nothing had happened. The engine revved and they drove off, leaving Emily on the lawn, alone, scared, and shaking. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and called Marcus. He answered, on the second ring. "Babe," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "They pushed me." That's all it took. Marcus didn't even hear the rest. He dropped the hammer in his hand, turned without a word, and sprinted the 2 blocks back home like a man on a mission. What he found on the porch made his stomach turn. Emily sitting on the steps, pale, disoriented, her hands protectively over her belly. Rage doesn't even begin to describe what coursed through Marcus's veins. But he didn't yell, didn't scream. He simply helped her up, held her tightly, and drove her straight to urgent care. Thank God, the baby was okay. Emily was bruised and shaken but stable. Still, the trauma was real. And Marcus? He'd seen his share of enemies, but nothing made his blood boil like the idea of 3 smug HOA enforcers putting their hands on his pregnant wife and walking away like nothing happened. The next day, Marcus called the HOA office. The receptionist didn't even try to sound surprised. "We'll investigate the matter," she said flatly. "You'll get a formal notice, if anything comes of it." That's when Marcus knew they were protecting their own. That this wasn't just misconduct, it was a cover-up. And something inside him snapped. This was no longer about a garden, or a rule, or even a shove. This was about respect, about standing up for your family when no one else will. Marcus spent the next 48 hours building a war plan. He combed through the HOA bylaws line by line, pulled up his home security footage, and drove to the county clerk's office to get records on the HOA leadership. The more he dug, the worse it got. Carl had a record, not criminal but plenty, of complaints filed in other communities, harassment, trespassing, use of excessive force, all buried under mountains of paperwork. The HOA president, his fishing buddy, the board meetings, closed to residents unless approved in advance. It was a racket, a rigged system built on fear and silence. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He rallied his neighbors. Some were hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation. But once they heard what had happened to Emily, the fear turned into fury. One neighbor confessed she had been fined $250 for having a garden hose visible. Another was threatened with foreclosure over a shed 3 inches too tall. It was an epidemic of petty tyranny. And Marcus lit the match that would set it all ablaze. He contacted the local news, told his story, gave them the footage. What aired 2 nights later was explosive. HOA enforcers accused of assaulting pregnant woman. Veteran husband fights back. The segment went viral. Hundreds of comments poured in online. Veterans, parents, neighbors, everyone was outraged. Marcus filed a police report, and his lawyer slapped the HOA with a lawsuit that named Carl, the president, and the entire board. Residents began holding secret meetings. A petition to dissolve the HOA gained traction. Carl was put on leave, but Marcus wasn't satisfied. He wanted accountability, justice, truth. Folks, if you're still watching, this is where your voice matters. If you believe no one should be bullied in their own home, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel, and make sure You click the bell icon and set it to all so you don't miss what happens next. Because this story is just getting started. 1 week after the news report aired, Marcus received a package. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, one taken from inside their backyard. On the back, scribbled in thick black ink, were the words, "You should have stayed quiet. The camera system, disabled the night before." The police were called, but the footage was gone. And Marcus realized something chilling. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The battle had only just begun. Stay tuned. Marcus's boots hit the pavement hard as he sprinted down the block. The only sound louder than his breath was the pounding in his chest. He didn't even wait for the front gate to swing open. He shoved it aside and rushed up the porch steps, where he found Emily curled on the bench, pale as moonlight, her hands trembling, one clutched to her belly. She looked up with tears in her eyes, trying to smile, but her lips were trembling. "The baby's okay," she whispered. That was all he needed to hear to unclench his fists, but it didn't cool the fire burning inside him. Later that afternoon, after a frantic trip to urgent care confirmed their unborn child was unharmed, thank God, Marcus called the HOA office, expecting at least concern, maybe even a shred of responsibility. Instead, the woman who answered barely listened, her tone colder than concrete. "We'll look into it," she said with the same energy someone might use to respond to a wrong pizza order. No apology, no urgency, no ounce of accountability. That was the moment Marcus knew this wasn't just a rogue enforcer gone wild. It was a rotten system, and it had chosen the wrong family to mess with. Because Marcus wasn't the type of man who folded under pressure, he was built by it. A combat leader who'd stared down enemies in the desert, he knew how to win wars. And this was war. He turned their guest room into a command center. Files, folders, a whiteboard, red pins, and timelines. He started with their own pile of HOA violations, dozens of letters with vague accusations and hidden fees, many of which were time-stamped during times they weren't even home. He printed each one, cross-referenced them with their security camera footage, and noticed a pattern. Every time a violation was issued, it was after visits from the same SUV, always with Carl in the lead. Then Marcus knocked on doors. He started with their next-door neighbor, an older man named Frank who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. At first, Frank was reluctant, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "They fined me $400 for trimming my tree branches wrong," he said. "Threatened to put a lien on my house when I tried to fight it." One by one, neighbors began sharing their stories. A young couple penalized for having wind chimes. A widow charged monthly fees for phantom infractions. One single mom whispered that Carl had once threatened to call Child Protective Services because her teenage son played basketball too loudly. It wasn't just Emily. It wasn't just Marcus. This HOA had been a private kingdom of fear, and its crown rested on the head of Carl and his so-called board. But Marcus didn't just want stories. He wanted proof. He dug deeper and found out the HOA's private security team, the ones that patrolled at night with flashlights and aggressive notes. They weren't even properly licensed in the state. No background checks, no oversight, just hired muscle with badges they printed themselves. Then came the bombshell. With the help of a lawyer, recommended by a fellow vet who had once sued his own HOA, Marcus unearthed a string of complaints against Carl from 2 previous neighborhoods. Allegations of harassment, verbal threats, even a video clip of him screaming at a disabled veteran over a recycling bin. But Carl had always walked away clean because the HOA president, the one currently overseeing their community, had been his fishing buddy for nearly a decade. Marcus's lawyer dug even deeper, and what they found behind the scenes was disgusting. Misappropriated funds, kickback contracts to friends of the board, inflated fines with no accounting, and even a property that Carl had quietly purchased through a shell company after foreclosing on a neighbor who couldn't afford to fight back. It was corruption hiding behind plastic smiles and neatly trimmed lawns. Marcus knew the system was rigged, but now he had the ammo to expose it. Still, as he built his case, things began to take a darker turn. One night, Emily woke up screaming. The backyard motion sensor lights had flickered on, and someone had left a dead bird on the porch, its wings spread and eyes pecked out. Another night, their internet went out mysteriously during a video call with their lawyer. A neighbor spotted Carl's SUV parked across the street late at night, engine off, lights out. Emily started sleeping with her phone clutched in her hand. Marcus installed new security cameras, reinforced the doors, and made sure Emily never went anywhere alone. The HOA wasn't just dismissing them anymore. They were watching. That's when Marcus decided to go public. He compiled all his documentation, photos, videos, testimonies, financial records, and contacted the local investigative news team. Within days, a reporter named Sandra came out to interview them. She had heard about dirty HOAs before, but this case made her jaw drop. The story aired the following Sunday night. Pregnant woman assaulted by HOA enforcer. Veteran husband uncovers widespread abuse. The footage of Carl pushing Emily, caught from a neighbor's doorbell cam, was shown in slow motion on the 6 o'clock news. The outcry was immediate. Emails flooded the HOA office. Neighbors who had once stayed silent were now ready to revolt. The board scrambled to do damage control, issuing a vague statement of regret, but the tide had turned. And if you've been following this story, if you believe in standing up for what's right when everyone else looks away, now's the time to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on that bell to all, because the truth we uncovered next will leave you speechless. And we're just getting started. With the pressure mounting, Marcus filed a civil suit against Carl and the HOA board. His lawyer was confident, and public support was on their side. But just when they thought they were gaining ground, something happened that shifted everything. One night, Marcus returned home to find their mailbox ripped open and papers scattered across the driveway. Most of them were junk, except one. A single envelope marked with no return address. Inside was a typed note, clean and precise, with a chilling message. Drop the lawsuit or we drop everything, your home, your wife, your baby. No signature, just that. Emily read it and burst into tears. Marcus's hands shook with rage. He'd faced IEDs and ambushes. He'd stared down men who'd tried to kill him. But this was personal. This was war on his family. And as he stared out into the quiet, picture-perfect street lit by porch lights and fake smiles, he knew the real battle had just begun. What Marcus would do next would shake the very foundation of the neighborhood and send shockwaves all the way to state regulators. But just when he thought he had it all under control, a secret buried deep within the HOA records would emerge, one that no one saw coming, not even Marcus. What he discovered would change everything. Stay tuned for part 4, because this story is about to explode. Marcus had always been a man of principle, but now, his sense of duty burned hotter than ever. The moment he saw Emily's bruises, the fear in her eyes, and the cowardice of those meant to protect rather than harass, something inside him snapped. And it wasn't just a protective instinct. It was the unmistakable call of justice. So, with his evidence-packed files under one arm and his lawyer at his side, Marcus took the battle beyond the confines of their gated community and straight into the public eye. First, they filed a formal complaint with the city. Not just about the assault, though that alone was enough to warrant criminal charges, but about the entire HOA's structure, its tactics, its finances, and its enforcement practices. Then, Marcus contacted the media. A local news station picked up the story, and it aired with a headline that made jaws drop across town. Pregnant woman assaulted by HOA enforcer. Husband fights back. They showed doorbell footage of Carl shoving Emily. They aired testimonies from other residents who finally found the courage to speak out. One elderly woman recounted how she had been fined hundreds of dollars for a lawn gnome that violated aesthetic protocol. A single mother revealed she'd been reported for excessive noise after her autistic son had a meltdown in the driveway. A father of 3 admitted he was once threatened with legal action for letting his kids ride scooters on the sidewalk. It was as if a dam had broken, and what came flooding out was decades of intimidation and cruelty hidden behind the veneer of neatly mowed lawns and decorative stone mailboxes. The truth was out now, and there was no putting it back in the box. Within days, the outrage in the community reached a boiling point. Someone started a petition to remove the entire HOA board, and it spread like wildfire. At block parties, whispered conversations turned into loud debates. At church gatherings and school pickup lines, people compared stories, shook their heads, and signed their names. Over 80% of the neighborhood signed that petition within a single week. The city, now under a microscope after the news coverage, began its own investigation into HOA practices, not just in Marcus's neighborhood, but in others with similar complaints. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Carl was arrested. Yes, arrested. The assault on Emily, previously brushed off by the HOA, had become a formal criminal case thanks to the media attention and the doorbell footage that clearly showed what happened. Carl's smug grin was nowhere to be seen in his mugshot. It was replaced by the pale, sunken look of a man who never expected to face consequences. But Marcus wasn't done. He filed a restraining order not only against Carl, but also against every member of the HOA enforcement team who had ever stepped foot on his property without a legitimate reason. His lawyer filed multiple civil lawsuits, both for damages and for HOA mismanagement. Then, Marcus demanded a full audit of the HOA's financial records, how they were spending money, who was getting paid, and why certain violations came with fees that never seemed to appear in the official budget. The city agreed, assigning an independent financial watchdog to comb through every receipt and bank transfer. That audit revealed something shocking. Tens of thousands of dollars in miscellaneous maintenance fees had been funneled into shell companies owned by friends of the board, some of whom didn't even live in the neighborhood. One company was owned by a cousin of the HOA president. Another had ties to a local contractor who had quietly purchased 3 homes in the area after residents were pressured into selling. It wasn't just corruption, it was calculated exploitation, and Marcus was determined to expose every last bit of it. But as all of this unfolded, something remarkable happened. People who had once been afraid to speak now walked with their heads high. A neighbor who hadn't spoken to Marcus since the day they moved in brought over fresh coffee and said, "Thank you. You gave us our voice back." Kids started playing in the yards again. Wreaths went up, wind chimes sang, and the neighborhood finally felt like a community, not a prison. If you believe in standing up for what's right, in protecting your family no matter the cost, and in never letting bullies hide behind titles, now's the time. Go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell to all so you never miss an episode. Because these stories aren't just entertainment. They're a reminder of the power we all have to fight back when justice is on the line. But just as Marcus began to breathe a little easier, a quiet knock came on his door one morning. A man in a plain gray suit introduced himself as a federal investigator, sent not by the city, but by the Department of Justice. "We've been watching the case closely," he said, "and we believe this might go deeper than just a rogue HOA." Marcus's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" The agent handed him a folder, unsealed. Inside were files, sealed complaints, from other HOA boards across the state, similar patterns, same tactics, same names, and at the center of it all, a private security firm operating in over 20 communities, run by none other than Carl's brother. This wasn't just about one neighborhood anymore. It was a network, a silent, creeping operation that had been exploiting homeowners, extorting fees, and threatening families across multiple states under the guise of order and enforcement. Marcus stared at the file, his jaw tightening. This wasn't the end, this was only the beginning. And what he would uncover next could lead to the downfall of an entire empire. Stay tuned for the final chapter, because the real truth has only just begun to surface. 6 months after that unforgettable day when Emily was assaulted and Marcus ignited a neighborhood revolution, everything had changed. But not just on paper. The air in the community felt different. The fear that had once crept through the hedges and whispered through late-night HOA letters was gone, replaced by a sense of solidarity and strength that no one could have predicted. The tyrannical HOA board that once ruled with threats and intimidation. Gone. Dissolved entirely. In its place stood a new elected group of neighbors, real people with real families just like the Taylors, who promised to lead with transparency, accountability, and heart. Every meeting was now public. Every financial report was disclosed. Every decision was made not in a shadowy back room, but in a community center filled with concerned, empowered residents. Marcus, once seen as just the new guy on the block, had become something more than a homeowner. He became a symbol of honor, of resilience, and of what it means to fight for your family no matter what stands in your way. He never sought attention, never wanted fame. But the stories neighbors told about how he stood his ground, how he refused to be silenced, spread far beyond the boundaries of that North Carolina suburb. People wrote him letters from across the country, thanking him for reminding them what courage looks like in everyday life. And Emily? She gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Justice. It wasn't just a beautiful name, it was a declaration, a promise to raise their child in a world where standing up for what's right meant something, where silence wasn't safety, it was surrender. Justice was the child of two fighters, born not into chaos but into hard-earned peace. As for Carl, the enforcer who thought he could shove a pregnant woman and walk away, his world crumbled. He lost his job, his reputation, and his ability to ever work in HOA enforcement again. The licensing board not only revoked his credentials, they publicly blacklisted him from any future involvement in community operations. And his brother, the one running that shady private security firm? Federal investigations uncovered widespread corruption across multiple communities. Charges were filed, properties were seized. It turned out the Taylors had not just cracked open one bad egg, they'd exposed an entire rotten system, one that had preyed on vulnerable homeowners for years. But Marcus didn't stop there. He began working with advocacy groups, helping others document and push back against HOA abuse. He used his military discipline and strategic mind to train others on how to defend themselves legally and peacefully. He didn't just win a battle, he sparked a movement. If stories like this move you, if they remind you of your own neighborhood, your own family, or your own sense of justice, then please take a moment right now to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so it's set to all. We bring you true, powerful stories that matter, and your support helps us reach more people who need to hear them. Because somewhere out there is another family just like the Taylors, feeling alone, unsure, and scared to speak up. Maybe this story gives them the strength they need. Maybe it gives you the strength too. But just when the Taylors thought the storm had passed, a certified letter arrived in the mail one crisp autumn morning. The envelope was official, marked with the seal of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Inside was a single page, neatly typed. It stated that a former HOA board member, one Marcus believed had fled the state after the collapse, had filed a federal countersuit, not for assault, not for defamation, but for damages, claiming that Marcus's public crusade had destroyed his livelihood and endangered his family. Emily read it twice, her hands trembling. Marcus just stared at the page, jaw clenched. He had exposed criminals, saved their neighborhood, and protected his wife and child. And now he was being dragged into court again? It felt like betrayal on a national level. But Marcus didn't flinch. He looked at Emily, then down at baby, Justice sleeping peacefully in her arms, and he said something simple but powerful. Then we'll fight again. Because the truth? Courage doesn't rest. Justice isn't a one-time act. It's a way of life. And some men, when you come after their family, will never stop until the last lie is exposed and the last bully falls. What Marcus didn't know, though, was that this federal countersuit was just the beginning. A trail of evidence buried in that former board members' financials would soon lead investigators to a discovery that no one, not even Marcus, was prepared for. The truth went deeper, darker, and higher up the chain than anyone imagined. And when it comes out, it could shake more than just the neighborhood. It could rock the country. Stay tuned for the next episode, because the story of the Taylors isn't over. Not even close. And that, my friends, is the story of how one man's courage, one woman's strength, and one family's love brought an entire neighborhood to its feet and brought a corrupt system to its knees. But their battle isn't over. If this story inspired you, made you angry, or reminded you of your own experiences with power gone wrong, don't stay silent. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think. Have you ever dealt with a nightmare HOA or seen someone stand up against injustice? We want to hear your story, and if you're new here, welcome to the family. Hit that like button if you believe in justice. Subscribe to the channel and make sure to turn on the bell notification and set it to all so you never miss a story like this one. We've got more real, emotional, and powerful stories coming your way. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in the Taylor's journey. Because in this world, sometimes the only way to fight back is to stand up loud, strong, and unafraid. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and always stand up for what's right.